Cole is sitting on a pile of cash, waiting. He's not panicking, not chasing. He's disciplined. He's going to wait for the next big crash, and when everyone else is losing their minds, he's going to back up the truck and buy. Carol, on the other hand, throws $300 into an index fund on the first of every month and genuinely does not care what the market is doing. All-time high, she buys. Blood in the streets, she buys. She might be the laziest investor alive. They both think they've outsmarted the other, and over the next 40 years, one of them gets quietly, mathematically demolished. And it's the one trying hardest to win, because researchers actually ran this exact experiment with a perfect, all-knowing investor who buys the precise bottom of every crash, and even that one lost. My name is Nick, and today we're figuring out what happens when you only invest every time the market crashes, and why the answer should change how you look at the cash sitting in your account. Let's keep this fair, because that's the only way the comparison means anything. Cole and Carol are the same age, same job, same paycheck, same $300 a month they can comfortably afford to put to work. They start on the same day with the same zero in the same kind of account. The only thing that's different is one belief sitting in each of their heads. Carol believes the market is a slow, ugly escalator, and the only job that matters is to keep stepping onto it forever, no matter what floor it's on. Cole believes that escalator occasionally collapses into a fire sale, and the genuinely smart move is to keep your money dry and pounce when it does. And here's the thing. On paper, Cole's plan sounds far more intelligent. Buy low. It's the first rule of investing, the one your uncle repeats at every barbecue like he personally discovered it. Carol's plan, by contrast, sounds like she's not even trying. She's buying high, she's buying low, she's buying on objectively terrible days, and she's doing it on purpose. One of these people is using their brain. The other one is using an automatic bank transfer. Hold on to that, because in about 40 years, it's going to matter a whole lot less than you'd think. So they begin, and for the first stretch, Cole looks like a genius in waiting. The market does what the market mostly does, which is grind upward in a way that's almost insulting to anyone hoping for a discount. Carol's $300 goes in every month and buys a little less each time as prices climb. She's not thrilled about it exactly, but she's also not thinking about it, which turns out to be the entire point. She set the whole thing up one Sunday afternoon, picked a single broad index fund, switched on the automatic transfer, and then more or less forgot her brokerage password. The confirmation emails stack up unread in a folder she has never once opened. Cole, meanwhile, is watching. He's got a watch list. He refreshes it. The market ticks up to a new all-time high, and he actually feels good about it because in his mind, every new high just means the eventual fall is going to be bigger and his entry is going to be sweeter. He tells his friends he's waiting for a better entry point. He says it with the calm confidence of a man who has read exactly one book about Warren Buffett, and then more time passes and the crash he's waiting for just doesn't come. This is the part the buy the dip fantasy never accounts for, so let me put a real number on it. From March of 2009 to February of 2020, the market climbed for nearly 11 straight years without a single bear market. 11 years. Over that stretch, it returned somewhere around 400%. Now picture Cole sitting through that entire run with his cash in a savings account, refreshing his watch list, muttering that it can't possibly keep going, watching the truck he was going to back up rust quietly in the driveway. Every month, Carol is buying. Every month, her money is compounding on top of the money she put in last month, which is compounding on top of the month before that. And every month, Cole is being patient, which is a very respectable word for doing absolutely nothing while the most powerful force in finance works for someone else. Here's why the timing matters so much, and it's the stat that should make you a little uncomfortable. The market spends most of its life at or near an all-time high. Since 1950, the S&P 500 has closed at a record high on roughly 7% of all trading days, and almost a third of those highs became permanent floors. The market simply never dropped below again. Think about what that means for Cole. Wait for a dip usually translates in practice to wait at a price you will never see again. The market is positive in about 3 out of every 4 years, so Cole isn't betting on a coin flip. He's betting against a loaded coin over and over with his own future as the stake. But maybe you're thinking, sure, but when the crash finally comes, Cole pounces and makes it all back in one heroic move. Reasonable thought. Let's actually test it because somebody already did, and the result is genuinely hard to believe. Charles Schwab ran a study on exactly this. They took 20 years of market history and tested a handful of investors who each put in the same money every year, and 3 of them matter for us. The first had perfect timing. Every single year, this investor magically bought at the exact lowest point, the best possible day every time for 2 decades. The second just fed the money in evenly as it arrived. No thinking, no waiting, basically Carol with a different name. And the third did exactly what Cole does. Kept it in cash, waiting for the right moment that always seemed to be just around the corner. Now, before I tell you the results, guess where the cash waiter lands. Because most people assume the gap between perfect timing and everyone else is enormous, and that sitting in cash is at least a safe middle option. The perfect timer, the one who nailed the bottom every year for 20 years, finished with about $186,000. Carol's no-thought approach, just feeding the money in as it showed up, finished at about $166,000. So 20 years of literally perfect, godlike timing beat barely trying by about $20,000 total. That's it. The single best market timer who has ever lived edged out a woman on autopilot by roughly $1,000 a year. And the cash waiter, Cole's strategy, $47,000. Not a typo. The patient genius keeping his powder dry finished with barely a quarter of what the woman who never looked at her account made. And here's the kick in the teeth. Schwab also ran one more investor, the unluckiest soul imaginable, who bought at the exact peak of every single year, the worst possible day, every time. That cosmic disaster of a portfolio still tripled the cash waiter. Read that again. Buying at the worst possible moment every year on purpose beat waiting for the perfect one by a factor of 3. Being in the market on terrible days was a rounding error. Not being in the market at all was the catastrophe, and that's only 20 years. Stretch that same gap across a lifetime, and it stops being sad and starts being almost comical. $100 dropped into the market back in 1928 would be worth well over $1 million today. That same $100 kept safe in cash the entire time, about $2,500. Same starting money, same century, except one of them is generational wealth and the other one barely covers a nice dinner. Every year Cole spends waiting, he's quietly choosing the dinner. Now, if I stopped there, you could fairly argue that none of those investors had a crystal ball. Cole's whole bet is that he'll spot the crash and the others won't. So let's give him the crystal ball. Let's give him more than that. Let's make him a god. A finance writer named Nick Maggiulli ran what might be my favorite study in this entire subject. He built a buy the dip strategy with perfect, all-knowing foresight. This investor saves cash every month and deploys it only at the exact lowest point between any 2 market highs, the precise bottom every time, with perfect knowledge of the future. Then he compared that all-seeing dip buyer against a boring dollar-cost averager who just invests the same amount every month and never looks. He ran it across every 40-year stretch he could, going back to 1920. The boring, mindless monthly investor beat the all-knowing god of market timing more than 70% of the time. Let that sit for a second. Even with perfect knowledge of every future bottom, the dip buyer lost in roughly 7 out of 10 cases. And it gets worse because that's the version where you're omniscient. The moment you make the god slightly human, the whole thing collapses. Maggiulli found that if you miss the exact bottom by just 2 months, the dip strategy loses to plain dollar cost averaging 97% of the time. You go from winning 30% of the time with perfect vision to winning 3% of the time with vision that's off by a few weeks. And real humans, the ones staring at a screen full of red, aren't off by 2 months. They're off by a country mile, usually in the wrong direction. Why does this happen? Why can't even God beat a person who isn't trying? It comes down to one quiet, brutal fact. While the dip buyer's cash is sitting there waiting for the perfect moment, it isn't earning anything and the market is drifting upward the whole time. The bottoms you're waiting for are rare and they almost always sit at price levels higher than where you could have just bought years earlier. In that 1995 to 2018 example, the single purchase the dip buyer made at the March 2009 bottom accounted for over half of their entire final portfolio. Half. The whole strategy lived or died on getting one purchase on one day perfectly right in the middle of the scariest financial moment in 80 years. And if you'd hesitated even a little, the way every actual human being would, that half evaporates. Quick aside before we go further, because this is exactly the kind of counterintuitive money math we pull apart constantly inside our school community. If you're the type who likes seeing the real numbers instead of the barbecue wisdom, the link's down below, and you can ignore it completely if you'd rather just keep watching. No pressure either way. So let's tally what else waiting costs Cole, beyond the lost dollars we already watched pile up. Because the crash discount he's dreaming about is the only number he ever looks at. And there are two more costs hiding underneath it. The first is the crash that never arrives on schedule. Corrections of 10% show up roughly once a year, sure. But real bear markets, the 20% plus drops Cole is actually waiting for, only come around every 3.5 years or so on average, and only about 1 in 4 corrections even becomes one. So Cole isn't waiting for a bus that's a little late. He's waiting for a bus that might not come for a decade, and while he waits, everyone who took the escalator is 3 floors up. And the second hidden cost is the cruelest one because it's psychological and it's the one nobody believes applies to them. Buying when everyone's scared sounds heroic right up until the moment you're the one who's scared. Now here's where I have to be honest with you, because if I only showed you the case against waiting, I'd be doing exactly what the lazy index fund crowd does when they pretend timing never matters. It does. There are real specific situations where having dry powder and deploying it into a crash is spectacular, and they're worth understanding. When a severe crash hits and you actually buy near the bottom, the returns are life-changing. Someone who bought at the March 2009 low wrote a roughly 17.5% annual return for the next 10 years. Someone who bought near the March 2020 COVID bottom saw the market hand them around 25% a year for the following 4, and that's including the rough patch in 2022. If you look across the last 13 bear markets, the average return in just the 12 months after the bottom was about 47%. So no, dip buying isn't stupid. When it works, it's the best trade of your life. The catch is that the people who actually bought the March 2009 bottom are about as common as people who leave Las Vegas richer than they walked in, and roughly 10 times louder about it. There's also a legitimate, disciplined version of this that isn't crazy at all. Like if you already have a lump sum or you're rebalancing a portfolio and steering money back into stocks while they're down, that's not cash hoarding. That's using money that was already going to be invested and being intelligent about the timing of a confirmed deep decline. The mistake was never buying low. Buying low is great. The mistake is two specific things. One, you cannot reliably know when the bottom actually is, and being off by even a little wrecks the whole edge, as we just saw. And two, the crash you're staking your future on might be 11 years away, and the opportunity cost of waiting almost always swallows the discount you eventually get. Cole isn't wrong that crashes are buying opportunities. He's wrong that he can afford to wait around for them. And this is where the whole thing comes back down to earth, because everything we've talked about so far assumes Cole behaves perfectly when his moment finally comes. He won't. Almost nobody does, and we have the data to prove it. There's a research firm called Dalbar that's tracked how regular investors actually behave for decades, not how they say they'll behave, how they actually do. And the picture is grim. In a recent year where the market returned about 25%, the average equity investor earned around 16.5%. They left more than 8 percentage points on the table in a single year through their own decisions. And the tell is what they did during the scary stretches. They didn't buy the dip. They pulled money out. In fact, Investors yanked money out of stock funds in every single quarter of that year, with the biggest withdrawals landing right before the market ripped higher. That's not a one-off. By that point, it marked 15 straight years of the average investor underperforming the very funds they owned. It's the financial equivalent of hiring a 5-star chef and then burning the meal yourself, carrying it to the table. Sit with how badly that breaks Cole's plan. His entire strategy depends on him being calm, rational, and aggressive at the precise moment when the actual evidence says human beings are terrified, frozen, and selling. The crash isn't a green light flashing buy now. It's a wall of red headlines, a retirement account that's down 40%, a spouse asking if you should get out before it goes to zero, and a very loud voice in your head agreeing with them. The buy the dip strategy asks for the most courage at the exact moment you have the least. It's a plan that only works if you're a robot, and the data could not be clearer that you are not a robot. Carol never has to be a robot. That's the quiet beauty of what looked at the start like the dumber plan. She doesn't have to be brave during the crash because she's already buying. She doesn't have to call the bottom because she's buying through it on the way down and on the way back up. When the market fell, her $300 that month bought more shares at lower prices automatically with zero courage required. She turned the scariest moments into her best purchases without feeling a thing because she removed herself from the decision entirely. The discipline Cole was so proud of, the patience, the watch list, the waiting, all of it turned out to be the expensive part. Carol's secret was that she never gave herself the chance to be smart, which meant she never gave herself the chance to be wrong. So, after 40 years, here's where our two investors actually land. Carol, who never timed a thing, who bought on the worst days and the best days with the same blank expression, is sitting on a portfolio that compounded relentlessly for 4 decades. Cole, who was patient, disciplined, and genuinely smarter about markets than 90% of people, spent years on the sidelines, missed the biggest run of his lifetime, and even when he did buy, never quite nailed it the way the fantasy required. They both started in the exact same place with the exact same money and the exact same goal. One of them just refused to let cleverness get in the way. And that's the trap, the real one, the one this whole video has been circling. It was never stocks versus cash or patience versus recklessness. Cole and Carol both walked in believing the secret to investing was being right about the market. Cole thought the edge was in timing it. Carol, almost by accident, proved the edge was in never needing to. The trap is believing that the cleverness is the point, that there's some perfect moment out there worth waiting for, when the math keeps screaming that the moment is now, and the only people who win are the ones boring enough to keep showing up. Now, I can already hear the obvious follow-up. What if you did both? Kept investing every month and kept some dry powder for the genuinely historic crashes? Because there is a version of that which is defensible, and the line between smart rebalancing and Cole fooling himself is thinner and more interesting than you'd expect. But that's a whole different conversation, and the math behind it might surprise you even more than what you just saw. For now, the next time someone tells you they're waiting for a better entry point, that they're keeping their cash ready for the next big crash, just ask them one question. How long are you willing to wait? Because the market doesn't owe you a crash. And while you're waiting for the perfect moment, the only thing compounding is the cost of waiting for it.